Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another Gigantic Hero Guide video. In this series of videos, I'm looking at the heroes in Gigantic broken down by their role, and this time we're looking at the shooters or the range damage dealers. Shooters in Gigantic are essentially defined by the fact that they use hit scan weapons, aka guns. They're relatively similar to mages in that their primary function is ranged damage, but they definitely go about it in a little bit of a different way. Shooters perhaps have a bit more focus on pure damage dealing, where mages might also focus more on area control or debuffs. The footage that we're watching today of all these different characters is by HSM Gameplay on YouTube, so please go and show him some love, guys. Our first shooter that we're going to be taking a look at is HK206. Any Overwatch players amongst you might be thinking, hey, that looks a lot like Bastion, and you would be correct. There's quite a few similarities between these two characters. Having said that, you definitely don't want to play this guy like you play Bastion. HK does a whole lot of damage, and considering that he is a shooter, and essentially a range damage, he's also very, very tanky. He's got 2100 health and 25 armor, which is basically more than you're going to find on most other DPS in the game. He does pay for this by having relatively low utility and almost zero mobility. So positioning on this guy is your most important skill. With no escapes, it's very easy to get caught out of position, particularly in a game that's as fast paced as Gigantic. However, because you don't have mobility, you have a lot of damage and huge impact on team fights if you can land your shots. The skill ceiling on shooters is pretty high, basically because the better you aim, the more damage you're going to do. HK is a great example of this. His right click, his railgun, fires an energy blast which deals 355 damage on a 10-second cooldown with an 80-meter range, which is bonkers. You can also upgrade this so that you can charge it up to do 525 damage, again up to 80 meters away. That's kind of crazy, and if you can land those consistently, you will be taking chunks out of the enemy team. The rest of his kit, starting with the left click, just fires a constant stream of bullets, as you can see in the footage. He gets a mortar, which he can fire that will knock enemies up and set them on fire. This is his only way of defending himself and keeping people away from him. And his last ability is Fortify, where he goes into turret mode. He gains 20% front damage reduction, better accuracy and resistance to being pushed. And finally his ultimate is Swarm, which fires a barrage of missiles at targets in front of you that auto aim. Pretty awesome. So because of how tanky this guy is and how much damage he can dish out, he's actually a pretty good counter to melee champions, which is normally the weakness of ranged. The problem is that lack of mobility can really get him into trouble, so your awareness needs to be really pretty pristine. You don't want to fortify and go into turret mode too much because it locks you down and causes you to be immobile, which for this guy is not a good idea. If you can get good hitting with that railgun, this guy is exceptional and can do a whole bunch of damage, and it can really win through team fights just by sheer weight of numbers. He will shred tanks. If you can set up in turret form and hold that stream of fire on a tank, the tank will fall over real fast. This is a really good character to get proficient with. The next hero that we're going to be taking a look at is none other than Beckett. I feel like Beckett is the standard that all the other shooters are compared against, because she's probably the most well-rounded shooter in terms of her defensives and offensive capabilities. Beckett's playstyle revolves around switching between her machine pistols and her cannon, so this is kind of like the Jinx mechanic from League of Legends. Machine pistols are up close and personal, very high damage at close range. Cannon is more longer range, does AoE splash damage, and switching back and forth between these weapons, depending on what situation you're currently in, is pretty vital. Beckett also has a reload mechanic where they have a certain amount of shots, and like in other games will then need to reload, and this is fairly unique to her here as well. So her left click fires whatever gun she currently has in her hand, her right click is a grenade, her Q switches between her machine pistols and her cannon, so between her weapons, and then her E is a jetpack which she can use to move around and escape bad situations. Her ultimate is Airstrike, which barrages an area with 3 missiles that come down from above. So Beckett has quite a lot of flexibility in the way that she can build. She can focus her build on being a real single target DPS, sort of close range shooter, So if there's a lot of melee or a lot of assassins trying to kill her constantly, she can focus on being super mobile and sort of focus on using her machine pistols. Alternatively, if it's a game where she's much more about that range damage, that consistent pressure output into like a group of enemies, into a team fight, she can build herself so that her cannon is more her sort of primary damage dealer, and it will set sort of enemies on fire and have a larger explosion range and things like that. It is important to note that even if you specialize in like cannon or machine pistols, you're still going to be switching back and forth between them a lot. It's not like focusing on one means that you don't use the other. That's not the case at all. The whole point of Beckett is using her mobility and the fact that she has two pretty unique ways of attacking the enemy between the machine pistols and the cannon available to her at any time. I think because her kit is so well rounded, Beckett is the sort of person that you would take up against almost anybody. There are some heroes that might be countered more by others, but just because of how well rounded she is, I would feel pretty confident taking her into a match blind. She does pay for this a little bit because she's sort of a bit less specialized. She doesn't have that pure damage output that HK does, for example, and she definitely doesn't have his tankiness. But with that grenade and with the jetpack as well, she just has the ability to just adapt to almost every situation on the fly, and in general is a really, really well-rounded shooter and a great champion too. The next hero that we're going to be taking a look at is Tiamat. Tiamat is currently considered one of the strongest heroes in the game and certainly one of the strongest shooters. Her kit is fantastic for dealing damage from a good sort of medium distance, and she also has one of the best escapes in the game, which is her thruster's ability. Tiamat can operate at a slightly longer range than Beckett, and her damage is also much more consistent. Her left click sort of fires every 0.7 seconds, and it's sort of, in my opinion, easier to land those hits on targets than it is to land every single shot from a Beckett machine pistol clip, for example. It's just a little bit easier to be more consistent. I think this is probably the key reason as to why Tiamat's so strong, although the rest of her kit is also pretty exceptional. So her right click locks onto enemy targets, and then releasing once those targets have been locked, fires homing missiles which cause burning to the enemy, which is absolutely great if there's something like a trip or a Taito that's being incredibly evasive. You can just use those homing missiles to get that consistent damage down. Her Q is a thruster's ability, which can be used to get out of dodge really fast if you have to. It's a great escape. And then her E is a EMP, so it fires a ball of electricity that explodes and puts major shock on enemies. Her ultimate, called Overclocked, she engages her thrusters, so flies up, and then just spams her left and right click in front of her a whole bunch. So it's just more damage, more intensity, more violence. The way Tiamat is built is also part of the reason why she's so strong. Her upgrades are really good. So as we mentioned earlier, her homing missiles will set people on fire when they hit them, and you can upgrade your left click to do 15% increased damage to burning targets, which seems like a no-brainer. You can then further upgrade that to hitting burning targets with your left click, your energy blast, will also crack their armor. So just hitting with those homing missiles and then just left clicking people down, you're setting them on fire, you're doing 15% more damage, and you're breaking their armor. And you can do that up to 50 meters consistently. It's really strong. If you're getting harassed a lot by assassins, you can upgrade your homing missiles to aim all at one target and stun. Combine that with your thrusters, you can really make yourself hard to bring down and very evasive. So you can swing your build and pivot into something much more defensive. If, for example, the other team has a Knossos, a Trip, and a Taito for some reason, you can really build yourself to make yourself incredibly hard to kill for assassins, and not every shooter necessarily has that ability. I would say that the three shooters we've covered so far can all play fairly similarly. Yes, there's some that favour longer range and shorter range, and some are more mobile, but in general you can group them together quite nicely into having a reasonably similar playstyle. This does change with our next shooter though. And last, and by no means least, we have the sniper Imani. Imani stands apart from the rest of the shooters, as I just mentioned, because her playstyle is pretty different. As a sniper, she's going to be occupying much longer ranges than the other shooters, and to be honest, this almost puts her in a class of her own. She really can't be compared, I don't think, that well to the other shooters in terms of not only the way that she plays, but also her role. To use an Overwatch reference, it's sort of like comparing Soldier 76 to Widowmaker. They're not the same playstyle at all. So let's start by going through Imani's kit. So her left click is called Auto Bolts and fires a burst of 3 shots. 55 damage up to 80 meters. Pretty good. Her right click zooms in for single shots. Deals 130 to 270 damage depending on how charged the shot is in the scope. Special ammo is her Q. So this adds 20% damage and causes targets to burn whenever you hit them with left clicks. And then her last ability is Smoke Bomb, which is a lobbed projectile which she throws. It explodes and creates a cloud that puts you and nearby allies in stealth, and causes the weakness debuff on enemies as well. Her ultimate is Kill Shot, so you zoom in and load 3 charged rounds, left click to fire, and deals absurd amounts of damage, 540 damage per round, up to 150 meters range. So Imani can really break the game. There are certain maps where you have really long sight lines onto a point, or positions just where Imani can sit and just be super oppressive. She's very aim based, and she has very little mobility. Well, she actually has 0 mobility. Her only defensive is her Smoke Bomb. So she is super susceptible to being jumped on by assassins if she's not paying attention, but that does mean that she can hit people from further than anyone else in the game, and if you're good at aiming, you can really apply a lot of damage. And if you know the maps well and you can control those sight lines, combine that with good aim, you basically make certain areas of the map completely off limits for the enemy team. And you're also doing all of this damage while not being put in danger. She's very strong. Having said that, there are areas of maps where the sight lines aren't so long. She's more accessible to the enemy damage dealers, and a good trip or Taito or Wu can really make her life hell. You know, you're always fearful or wondering about where that trip is going to come from next. And because you don't have any mobility, and odds are you're probably quite far away from your team, you're not going to get any help. So it's a real trade-off. It's a real balance you've got to strike. Her upgrades actually contain a surprising amount of utility for a sniper. I think it's because the devs have made it so, yes, she is a sniper primarily. She has longer range and absurd damage. However, if you are hard countered, let's say you come up against a team with a Taito and a Trip, and you're playing the sniper, you're going to be in for a bad time. The moment you move too far away from your team, they can use that speed and mobility to get to you and basically make your life a living hell. So you can specialize to be more of a left click, sort of medium close range left click spammer. You can do things like apply freeze and give yourself movement speed buffs, using some special ammo to charge up your left click. You can make your left click give you movement speed when you hit and things like that. So you can build her, you know, if things are going really badly and you're getting jumped on way too much and your team aren't close enough, you can build yourself to be more of a left click focused specialist. It's not as effective, and there are heroes like Beckett and the other shooters that are going to do that better than you. However, again, that trade-off is there. If you can sit back and snipe and you get into those positions, you can be really oppressive. So that concludes it for the 4 primary shooters in Gigantic. You could include Foden in this list, but he's really more of a support character. That's really where his role sits, so I'll be including him in my support roundup. But he's definitely a shooter-support hybrid, so you'll hear more about him later. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Gigantic launches tomorrow, April 9th. Super excited. I hope to see all you guys there. Please come follow me on Twitch, on twitch.tv/Zane25. And I can't wait to see you guys in game. Take it easy.